Hi BookTube. Today I'm going to make my review of The Friends of Harry Perkins by Chris Mullin. So this book is a sequel to the 1982 novel A Very British Coup. And I'll give you a quick recap of that original book, the basic gist of it. A very left-wing prime minister, very left-wing Labour Party prime minister, is overthrown in a political coup, not by the military, but by a combination of established forces like the media, opposition politicians, intelligence agencies, and the Americans. When that was the general gist of the story. So when I heard in 2019 that Chris Mullin was writing a sequel, I honestly thought, what more is there to say? What more is there to say? So I was just curious and picked it up. I haven't read the original, but it's on my wish list. And the title says it all: The Friends of Harry Perkins. So basically, a group of political allies to Harry Perkins get together to make some kind of focus group celebrating Harry Perkins's life. The story happens the story takes place several decades later in the wake of his passing. And it is a story about post-Brexit. Now, Brexit being the UK leaving the European Union. Now, I'm going to do something very annoying to some people. And that is, I'm not going to tell you what my position on Brexit is. Because I know people have a lot of strong emotions about it. And strong opinions about it. Not emotions, opinions. You're welcome to express those opinions in the comments, but I'm not going to tell you what to think. What I do know is that this book is a response to Brexit. Nothing more. It is just an excuse of using the previous book's recognition so that the author, Chris Mullin, can get his point across. Chris Mullin, by the way, was a cabinet minister to Tony Blair. So, I didn't like this book. I rate it a 4 out of 10 because he only used this book to used a hastily, shoddily cobbled together narrative to get his political point across that Brexit is bad. The backdrop of this book shows a UK in political decline, in economic decline, economic decline, and as well as a backdrop of escalating tensions between the United States and China, which, by the way, is just a background. It's just in the background. Nothing really happens on that front. So it's years later, post-Brexit, post-January 2020, and the United Kingdom has decreased in influence in the world, and standards of living have decreased in the UK. Whatever, and the author claims that's a result of Brexit. Meh. But that is the backdrop to which Fred Thompson, who was an aide to the late Harry Perkins, that is the environment he enters when he enters British politics. The story itself is Fred Thompson, who is actually more of shall we say a Blairite, more of a centrist politician compared to Harry Perkins. Although he does honor Harry Perkins's memory believing he was a great man with vision. But he is more of a moderate politician, and this story describes his climb up the greasy pole of British politics, as Chris Mullin would say, or him rising through the ranks. And on the way, there's a lot of political maneuverings so that he rises to become an MP, to become leader of his political party, and then to become prime minister. That's it. That's basically the story. But it's a very, very shallow story. There's some interesting aspects in there, but not enough for me to give it any more points. I was hoping to have a lot more detail about what it takes to rise through the ranks in British politics. Chris Mullin doesn't say much. So one thing I did find interesting was there was like a political realignment. In the original story, all the established forces teamed up to bring down Harry Perkins, who was too left-wing. Now, Fred Thompson, the Labour Party leader, who was a friend to Harry Perkins, teams up with established forces to bring down the overly right-wing conservative government. So I found that political realignment interesting. That happens all the time here in Indonesia, by the way. So political alliances are constantly shifting. Yesterday's friend is tomorrow's enemy. Yesterday's enemy is tomorrow's friend. That kind of thing. That I found genuinely interesting. Now, but that was not enough. It's a very shallow story. It gets a little bit into the detail of his personal life as well, which is actually some more poignant emotional moments in there as well. So this book is not a total loss, but it's just not enough. It's just meh. So I give the book 4 out of 10. But the worst aspect of this book, why I wouldn't recommend it, and why I say it's just a hasty response to Brexit. Forgive the motorcycles. The reason I say that is because the chronology, the timeline is an utter mess. So the story itself, sometimes the pacing is slow. It takes place over the course of a few hours, but then it speeds up to a few days, a few months and weeks and months, and then a few years. So the story speeds up and slows down randomly. The author focuses in on some of the political maneuverings, but then zooms out and just shows the bigger picture and says, and then 3 years later, so and so. So the timeline was not consistent, and there is a mixture of fictional and real prime ministers. He name drops a whole bunch of real name prime ministers. He names, let's see, there was Theresa May, there was David Cameron, there was Tony Blair, there was Margaret Thatcher, there was John Major. I don't know if Gordon Brown was in there as well. I don't remember. Boris Johnson, thank goodness, is not in this book. Yeah, that's my politics showing there. I'm sorry, I never liked the guy. But then again, this book is a very political book, so I should have said trigger warning politics in the beginning. I'll have it in the title name. So he mixes in a whole lot of real prime ministers with fictional ones as well. He gives how do I put this? He doesn't clearly explain which prime minister came after which one, or who came before which one. Harry Perkins, I presume, comes after Margaret Thatcher, but then he's overthrown and then John Major steps in? The book never really details. And he said it had like 6 Labour Party leaders, and they've been in opposition since Tony Blair, which is true, or since Gordon Brown. But they threw in a nameless Tory prime minister in there as well, so it was very unclear who was prime minister and who was leader of the opposition at any given time. So it was a complete mess. The timeline was a complete mess, as well as the fact that a lot of the politicians and bureaucrats from the late 1980s ought to have been dead or retired by the time this story begins, but the majority of them are still there. What the hell? And the author, Chris Mullin, even apologizes in the preface for not paying attention to the timeline. He asks the reader to forgive him. He's apologizing for bad writing. Wow. By the way, Chris Mullin was a cabinet minister and MP under Tony Blair. Just so you know who Chris Mullin is. At the end of the book, there is 2 additional short stories called The Lord Cardinal and The Man Who Shot the President. They're also political novellas. They're okay, I guess. They just add a little bit of meat to the book, and I appreciate that, because this is one of the few books I actually finished in 2 days. I read the whole thing in 2 days, in multiple sittings, granted, but it's one of the fastest books I've read. I would hazard to guess that this book is about as long as my book. So there you go, 4 out of 10. I wouldn't recommend this book. I still want to read the original though, A Very British Coup. Have a nice day. Goodbye.